My name is Marin Delaney, and I was 31 years old the day I realized my family had decided to forget me. It happened at my mother's funeral. Not in some metaphorical way, not over time, I mean actively, deliberately forgotten. I found out when the usher handed me the program and my name wasn't there. The paper was thick, ivory-colored soft at the edges like it had been handled lovingly. In loving memory of Linda Mae Delaney was printed across the front in gold script framed by lilies. It looked expensive. It looked like something my mother would have quietly rolled her eyes at, too polished, too impersonal. But I held on to it anyway. I needed to believe I was somewhere in it. When I opened it, I wasn't. Undersurvived by there was only one name, Emily Grace Delaney daughter. Not me, not Marin. I was born in 1992 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to a woman who loved color and silence. My mother, Linda, was an artist, stained glass, mostly sometimes oils, and raised me alone after my father left when I was 4. I grew up in a small brick apartment above a bakery, went to community college on a scholarship, and now I teach art workshops part-time while I write a memoir my mother never got to read. I'm engaged to a man who still reads paper books and believes in listening more than talking. His name is Noah. That morning, Noah was standing beside me as I read the program. He's 34, kind-eyed, calm, under pressure, a high school literature teacher. The kind of man who says, "I'm proud of you," in the same tone some people say grace. He leaned over and looked at the paper. Then at me. "They left you out," he said quietly, as if confirming what we both already knew. My heart thudded in my ears. The chapel smelled like wet coats and lilies. The music, something light and string-based, swirled around us, but I didn't hear it. Not really. I just saw the absence of my name where it should have been. I took a breath and stepped inside. We walked together down the aisle of the church I'd grown up in, the same one where I'd watched my mother install stained glass windows over 2 hot summers when I was 15. I scanned the front pew. Martin Delaney. My father sat tall and still in a navy suit, silver hair, combed back hands, folded like a judge behind a bench. Martin is a prominent estate lawyer. Brilliant, strategic, never particularly warm. He remarried shortly after he left us and started a new family, one he never invited me to be part of. Seated next to him was Emily, his golden child, my half-sister. 24 years old, all pearls and posture. She looked composed, fragile, in a performative kind of way. Her black dress fit like a statement. From across the room, I could already picture the stories she'd tell afterward about being Linda's caretaker, about how close they were. And no one would question her because she looked the part. I had barely taken a step toward the front when Martin stood, his voice low and clear. "Marin, this section is for family," he said. My steps halted. My throat dried. I looked at him, this man who had once kissed my scraped knees and later told me to stop calling him so much. This man who still introduced Emily as my daughter, but introduced me, when he had to, as Linda's girl. "She was my mother," I said. He didn't answer. Just looked at me with that expression I'd seen too many times, the one that said, "Don't make a scene, Marin." An usher guided us to the back row, 5 pews from the sound booth. I sat down like I was underwater, the weight of the program still in my lap. Noah sat beside me, one hand resting quietly on my leg. The service began. Reverend Paul, who had baptized me in this very chapel, spoke of Linda's grace, her creativity, her contributions to the community. He never mentioned me. He never said Linda is survived by her 2 daughters. I sat there listening to the life of a woman I had known better than anyone, narrated by people who barely knew her at all. My father stepped up next, speaking like he was delivering a closing argument. He called her complex. He said they had respect, if not always harmony. And then he pivoted, as I knew he would. But what lives on is not the past. It's the future. It's legacy. And I see that legacy in our daughter Emily. Applause. Emily followed. Her voice trembled in all the right places. She told stories I had never heard, claimed memories I knew couldn't be true. She called Linda her best friend. I sat 5 pews back, hands locked together, the pressure keeping me from unraveling. When the last prayer was said and people bowed their heads, Noah leaned toward me. "You don't have to take this," he whispered. "If I leave," I said, "they win." He didn't argue. He reached into his coat and handed me a folded envelope. "She gave this to me," he said, "before she passed. Told me to keep it, just in case." It was a note, handwritten, uneven, smudged where the pen had slipped. My mother's final letter to me. "If they forget to say your name, say it yourself. If they try to write you out, stand up and write back. You are my voice now. Don't whisper." I stood. Chairs creaked, heads turned. Noah rose too, his hand resting gently on the small of my back. And just like that, the silence broke. After the funeral, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't grieving, I was. But the grief had started long before my mother died. It had started when I was a child, and I realized my family had already buried me. That night, back at our apartment, I sat at the edge of the bed still wearing my funeral dress. My hands were folded in my lap the same way they had been in the church, quiet, contained, polite. Noah was in the kitchen boiling water for tea, giving me space the way only someone who truly sees you can. He didn't ask questions. He knew sometimes the silence had to come first. On the wall across from me was a painting, one of my mother's earlier works done in oils before her hands began to tremble. It was abstract, all warm reds and fractured shapes, but when you stepped back it looked like a woman shielding a child from the rain. I'd always loved that piece, she never titled it. I used to think it was about survival. Now I wondered if it was about erasure. I was 7 when I understood what it meant to be an afterthought. It was Christmas Eve. We lived in a narrow 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery on 4th Street. I'd spent the whole week making paper snowflakes and stringing popcorn garlands. My mother, Linda, still young then, only in her 30s, had scraped together enough money to buy me a set of watercolor paints and a small easel. We didn't have a tree that year, so she painted one on the window with green tempera and let me add ornaments with colored markers. That night, I wrote my father a letter. Martin Delaney, still daddy in my mind then, though I barely saw him. I asked him to come see our tree, just for a few minutes, just to sit with us. He didn't show up. 2 days later, a package arrived. Inside was a book on marine animals, something I had been interested in when I was 5, and a card that read, "To Marin from Dad, Nancy, and Emily." That was the first time I saw her name in ink, Emily. Nancy was Martin's new wife. They'd married a year after the divorce was finalized. Emily was their daughter, my half-sister. At the time, she was a toddler, maybe 2. I remember staring at the card like it was a puzzle with a missing piece. My mother sat beside me on the couch, folding laundry. She looked over, saw the package, and didn't say a word. She just took one of my socks, matched it with its pair, and kept folding. That was her way. Linda didn't badmouth Martin. She didn't rant about custody or payments or betrayal. She just adjusted. And I learned to adjust too. To quiet myself. To shrink when space was tight. To stop asking questions that made people uncomfortable. As I got older, the split between our worlds widened. Emily went to private school, took ballet horseback riding. I got secondhand textbooks and brown bag lunches. On holidays, Martin's annual Christmas card showed the 3 of them on ski trips or standing in front of grand fireplaces. I was never in the pictures. I was never mentioned. My mother made up for it the best she could. She taught me how to stretch color across a canvas. She taught me how to look at the negative space, how to see what wasn't said. When I started showing promise as an artist, she cheered louder than anyone. When I got a scholarship to community college, she told everyone in her gallery circle, even the ones who didn't care. But she never, not once, encouraged me to ask for more from my father. "He is who he is," she would say. "And you are who you are. That's enough." Except it wasn't. By the time I was 25, Linda was already losing control of her hands. She dropped her coffee mug twice in 1 week. Started forgetting her studio hours. One afternoon, she left the stove on and burned through an entire skillet. I found her crying on the kitchen floor, hugging a pot holder to her chest. The diagnosis came not long after. Parkinson's. Aggressive. Unforgiving. I moved back in with her, quit the gallery assistant job I'd taken after college, and started caregiving full-time. It wasn't a choice. It was a responsibility. One I took without hesitation and without help. Martin didn't offer support, not financial, not emotional. When I called him once to ask for assistance covering Linda's medication, he said it wasn't appropriate for him to get involved. That was his favorite phrase, not appropriate, as if grief had etiquette. Emily called twice during that time. Once to ask if Linda was well enough to attend her graduation. Once to say she was sorry to hear the diagnosis. That was it. The last year was the hardest. Linda stopped speaking clearly. Her hands curled in on themselves. Her eyes, once so alive, began to drift when I spoke. But sometimes in the early morning when I helped her sit upright and poured warm tea into a cup with a straw, she would reach for my hand and hold it tight. And in that squeeze, I felt everything she couldn't say anymore. One night, shortly before she passed, she motioned for her sketchbook. Her handwriting was barely legible, but she managed to write 6 words before her body gave out for the day. Don't let them tell your story, she knew. Even then, she knew they would try. And now here I was, erased from the program, the speeches, the legacy. But I had that sketchbook. I had those years. I had her. Back in the apartment, Noah returned with tea. He sat beside me, his shoulder against mine. We didn't speak for a while. Then he opened his laptop. I need to show you something, he said gently. He pulled up a gallery website, a new exhibition in New York, featuring lost works by Linda Delaney. Curated, according to the banner, by Emily Grace Delaney. I stared at the screen. I couldn't breathe. She's selling Mom's work, I said flatly. Noah nodded, and claiming stewardship of her estate. I swallowed hard. She didn't even know where the studio was. Well, he said, closing the laptop softly, she does now. I didn't know how to fight. Not really. I'd grown up learning to endure, to survive, to remain composed in the face of dismissal. Fighting, especially with family, had always seemed like a luxury reserved for people who believed they mattered. People like Emily. But that night, sitting beside Noah with the glow of his laptop screen still haunting the room, something shifted. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was furious. Noah didn't push. He never did. That was part of his magic. He didn't try to fix me or lead me anywhere. He simply made space and trusted I would find the door myself. We sat in silence for a long time after he showed me the gallery site. Emily's name was plastered all over the event banner, Legacy Illuminated, a private collection of Linda Delaney's final works. Curated by Emily Grace Delaney. There was no mention of me. No mention of the studio my mother and I built brick by hand. No mention of the hundreds of hours I'd spent cataloging her pieces while Linda slept in a chair beside me. I closed the laptop slowly. I don't even know how she got the keys, I said finally. Noah looked at me steady as ever. Probably from your father. Of course. Martin still held the lease. Technically, he had always been listed as Linda's studio co-owner, a business formality when they were still married. He had never set foot in the place, but he never removed his name either. Linda had asked him twice to sign it over. He refused. Both times said it was simpler this way. Now it was simpler to erase me. Noah leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. What do you want to do, Marin? The question landed gently, but it stirred everything. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Instead, I got up and crossed the room, pulled down the old gray storage box where I kept my mother's studio notebooks. Inside were sketches, gallery notes, pricing sheets, and a manila folder with a post-it note written in Linda's careful script, "For Marin, if they try." My throat tightened. Inside the folder were several signed letters, not legal documents, not notarized, but handwritten statements. In one, Linda clearly stated that Marin Delaney, her daughter, was the only person authorized to handle her personal archive. In another, she sketched out a draft for a solo exhibition we had planned together. My name was scribbled into the margins next to nearly every piece. It wasn't a legal defense, but it was her voice. I turned back to Noah. I want to be seen, I said quietly. Not by them. I'm done chasing their permission. I want the world to know the truth. He nodded once. Then we start there. The next morning, we drove out to the studio. It was early, the city still wet from last night's rain. The keys still worked, though the lock was stiff. When I opened the door, the smell of turpentine and lavender oil flooded out like memory itself. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. My mother's final piece still stood at the far end, partially covered with a dust cloth. Her brushes, carefully arranged by color and shape, sat untouched. The sunlight fell through the stained glass skylight she had installed herself, her last major work done with trembling hands and a steel will. I walked slowly to the workbench. My notebook was still there, the one I'd kept while helping her archive everything. I opened it, flipped through the pages, paused when I saw my own handwriting beside hers. That collaboration, that intimacy. It was sacred. And Emily wanted to slap her name across it for prestige. I want to write a piece, I said. Noah turned from the bookshelf. A piece. Not just a letter to the gallery, a full essay. The truth. About my mother, about her art, about what it means to be erased by your own family and still come back anyway. He smiled. Good. You think anyone would publish it? He paused. If they don't, we will. That's who he was. Not the man who stormed into rooms and made noise, but the one who built microphones for others. I sat at the desk and started typing. The words came in bursts, some from memory, some from pain. It wasn't elegant at first, but it was honest. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small. I felt solid. When we got home that evening, Noah made pasta and played Miles Davis in the background, one of Linda's favorites. He moved easily around the kitchen, humming under his breath, pausing now and then to check on me. He didn't say much. He never filled silences just to fill them. He understood that healing was a quiet thing. That night, I curled up beside him on the couch, watching the city lights flicker against the window. I thought about how different he was from every man I had known growing up. Noah didn't punish silence. He waited inside it. And he never, not once, asked me to be anyone else. I remembered the first time we met at a community arts fundraiser 3 years ago. I had been standing in front of one of my mother's older stained glass panels, half listening to a donor talk about tax write-offs when he came up beside me and said, "That piece doesn't look like it wants to be here." I had laughed, surprised. "It doesn't," I'd replied. Neither did I back then, but I stayed, because he asked questions that didn't have agendas, because he read books instead of judging covers, because when I told him about Linda, really told him, he didn't flinch. He just said, "She sounds like someone worth knowing." Now 3 years later, he was the only family I trusted to sit in the back row with me, to hand me my mother's last words and to say, "Let's tell your story." The next morning, I submitted the essay to 3 independent arts publications and emailed a copy directly to the gallery that was planning the Emily-curated exhibit. Noah helped me edit it, but the words were mine. The subject line read, "You forgot her real daughter." It started with a message request. I was in the kitchen folding laundry when I saw the notification pop up on my phone. Subject line, "Your submission, the art of being forgotten." I held my breath, then opened it. "Dear Marin, thank you for your beautiful, brave, and necessary submission. We'd be honored to publish it this Sunday in our Voices column. I've made only minimal edits. Your truth deserves to stand as is. Would you be open to an interview as a follow-up next week? Asha Lee, Senior Editor, The Curator's Lens." I read it twice before calling out, "Noah." He appeared in the doorway, drying his hands on a dish towel. "What, they're publishing it? This Sunday." A smile slowly spread across his face, not the kind you flash, but the kind that builds from the inside out. They'd be fools not to. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the message again. The Curator's Lens was no small blog. It was one of the most respected independent arts platforms on the East Coast, fiercely editorial, fiercely honest. It reached thousands of museum curators, gallery directors, and artists every week. And now it was going to carry my name, my words, my side. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. On Sunday morning, the piece went live. The headline read, "The Artist's Other Daughter, a True Account of Inheritance Erasure and a Mother's Final Wishes," by Marin Delaney. I didn't refresh the page obsessively. I didn't read the comments. I just waited and let the truth find whoever needed it. By that afternoon, the emails started coming in. Former students of my mother, collectors who remembered Linda's first gallery show back in '98, a woman who once bought a sun catcher from my mom at a street fair and still had it in her kitchen window. They weren't angry. They were grateful. They remembered her. And now, they remembered me too. But not everyone was pleased. That night, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another came in, this time from a number I knew too well. Martin Delaney. I didn't answer. Noah walked into the room just as my phone chimed again. A text this time. I would advise you to retract that article. You've caused damage to your mother's reputation and to Emily's. We're considering legal action. I handed the phone to Noah. He read the message and let out a quiet sigh. Of course, I didn't name him once, I said, voice tight. He doesn't care about truth, Maureen. He cares about control. He was right. But Martin wasn't the only one who reached out that night. A few hours later, my inbox pinged again. Subject, your story moved me, can we talk? It was from Asha Lee, the editor who had published my piece. Her message was short, warm, direct. She said the response to the article had been overwhelming. She'd received over 70 emails in the first 5 hours. She wanted to do a follow-up, maybe a podcast interview, maybe more. When I Googled her, I found a photo. She was in her early 40s, sharp cheekbones, bright glasses, the kind of smile that could cut or cradle depending on the situation. She'd written essays on Asian American identity, the politics of curation, and why gatekeeping still thrived in inclusive art spaces. In other words, a woman who knew what erasure looked like and called it by name. We spoke the next afternoon. Her voice was calm but electric. Every sentence from her felt like it had been sharpened before being spoken. I want to be honest, Marin, she said after our initial greetings. This story isn't just about you. It's about what happens when women's legacies are rewritten by people who never earned them. I was quiet. You're not the only one, she continued. But you're one of the few willing to say it out loud. She asked if I would do a recorded conversation with her, something public, something real. I said yes. The interview aired 2 days later. And that's when the second wave hit. Someone on social media connected the story to the upcoming Legacy Illuminated exhibition, the one Emily was curating. They shared screenshots. Names were named. Suddenly, there were hundreds of comments. Some supportive, some vicious, some asking hard questions. Why hadn't Marin been acknowledged in the exhibit? Why was her name absent from press releases? Where were Linda's own statements? That night, the gallery pulled the event from their homepage. The official statement followed within 24 hours due to new information concerning the Delaney family estate and questions about authorship and curatorship. The Legacy Illuminated exhibition has been postponed pending review. I sat on the couch holding my phone as Noah read the statement aloud beside me. I didn't think they'd fold that fast, I whispered. They didn't fold, he said. They blinked. That's all, but it's a start. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. The truth was out there, yes. But I hadn't reclaimed anything yet. Not legally, not emotionally. I hadn't set foot in that studio since the essay went live. But I knew this much. Silence was no longer an option. 2 days later, I got another letter, this time delivered in person. Certified mail, from Martin's law office. The envelope was thick, official. Inside, the tone was formal and threatening. They accused me of damaging the family reputation, of interfering with an ongoing contractual agreement of defamation by implication. They demanded a written apology and retraction. They gave me 7 days to comply. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I slid it across the table to Noah. They think I'll back down, I said. He folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Will you? I shook my head. Not this time. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking to be let in. I was walking in through my own door. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I touched it again. Each time I passed it, I felt something low in my chest. Not quite fear, not quite rage, just that old familiar warning. Stay quiet, Maureen. Don't escalate. But I wasn't 7 anymore. I wasn't watching Martin close the door behind him. I was 31, and they had tried to bury my name beside my mother's, and I was finally ready to fight. Still, I knew I couldn't do it alone. On the 3rd morning, I searched for her. Olivia Trent, attorney, 48, known for representing women in contested inheritance and estate suppression cases, especially cases involving posthumous manipulation, coercion, and erasure. I'd first read about her in a profile piece. Asha Lee had sent me an article titled "The Lawyer for the Daughters They Forgot." The headline had lodged itself in my memory like a needle. Olivia worked out of a brownstone office in the East Village, far from the mahogany conference rooms where men like Martin lived. Her firm's website was simple: no gold seals, no Latin slogans, just her name and one line beneath it: "We protect voices silenced by legacy." That was all I needed. When she picked up my call, her voice was sharper than I expected, low measured with a directness that made me sit straighter without thinking. "Marin Delaney," she said, after I introduced myself. "I've read your essay." "Oh," I said, surprised. Twice she added, "I assume you're calling about the letter your father sent." I exhaled. "Yes." There was a pause. Then, "Come in tomorrow at 10. Bring everything." Her office was nothing like Martin's. No cold leather chairs or framed Ivy League degrees. Olivia's walls were covered in black and white photographs of artists, writers, and women holding protest signs. On one shelf sat a signed copy of The Feminine Mystique. On another, a framed napkin with scribbled words. She didn't whisper. She shook my hand like a surgeon sizing up a task. "I've seen this before," she said, holding Martin's letter between two fingers like a spoiled piece of fruit. "They're not suing you. Yet. This is a scare tactic. If you retract, they win in silence. If you don't, they have to play their next card." "I won't retract," I said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Now tell me everything, from the moment your mother got sick." So I did. I told her about the years I spent caregiving, about the sketchbooks, the final works, the letter Linda left Noah. I even showed her the manila folder my mother labeled "If They Try." She listened without interrupting, taking notes in an old-fashioned notepad. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair. "There's a path here," she said, "but it depends on one thing." "What, did your mother ever draft a will?" I swallowed. She started. We talked about it. She didn't want to involve Martin. She said she'd do it quietly, with her friend Caroline. She was a notary and used to work with the Arts Council. But I don't know if she ever finished. Then we find Caroline Olivia said. It took less than 2 days. Caroline Reed, 73, widowed, retired, still living in the same craftsman house 5 blocks from Linda's studio. When I knocked on her door, she opened it halfway still in her apron and blinked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Marin," she said, voice cracking. "I thought you moved." "I did," I said gently. "But I need to ask about something my mother left behind. A document." She paused. "Come in." Her house smelled like cinnamon and old wood. She poured us tea without asking and sat across from me at the kitchen table. When I explained what I was looking for, she nodded slowly, her hand shaking a little as she reached for her drawer. "I was wondering when this would come back around," she murmured. Inside the drawer was a small fireproof box. She opened it, flipped through a series of envelopes, and pulled out a thin stack of folded papers, all dated, all handwritten. "I notarized it myself," she said. "Your mother wanted privacy. She was tired of lawyers. She said, if it's real on paper and real in heart, it's real enough for me." She handed me the document. My hands trembled. It wasn't formal, not by Martin's standards. No law firm letterhead. No affidavit, but it was signed and witnessed, dated 4 months before Linda passed. It stated clearly, "I, Linda Mae Delaney, declare that my artistic legacy, including all original works materials and records, housed in my private studio, belongs solely to my daughter, Marin Elaine Delaney. No other party shall claim ownership, representation, or curatorial rights without her express written consent." Signed, Linda M. Delaney, July 3rd. Below her signature was Caroline's own marked witness and notary. I sat back, heart thundering. "She never told me she finished it," I whispered. Caroline smiled softly. Linda was tired of defending what everyone already knew. She trusted that one day you'd know what to do with it. Olivia read the document slowly in her office. Then, once more. "It's enough," she said. "Not to win everything yet, but to stop them cold." I stared at her. "You're serious, Marin," she said. "This is the foundation of legal standing. You now have a signed witness declaration of her intent. That changes everything." She drafted a cease and desist letter that same afternoon. It was short, direct, and brutal. She sent copies to Martin's office, the gallery, and Emily. The subject line simply read, "Cease false claims to artistic estate of Linda M. Delaney." That evening, I received a one-line email from Martin. We will respond in due course. No apology, no acknowledgement, just that dry, weaponized civility. But Olivia was already 10 steps ahead. The moment they know you have standing, she said, they'll shift tactics. Expect emotion, expect pressure. This is when they'll come for your guilt. I nodded slowly. I've lived under their guilt my entire life, I said. It doesn't work anymore. And just like that, I saw it clearly. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to belong. I was fighting because I already did. It was raining when Emily called, a soft, relentless drizzle that coated the city like a hush gray light filtering through the windows of our apartment. I had just returned from Olivia's office, the manila folder now tucked safely in our locked drawer, when my phone rang. Unknown number, area code 7117 Harrisburg. I knew before I picked up. Maureen. Her voice was careful, not soft, not angry, controlled, like someone walking across thin ice and unsure whether to press harder or turn back. I didn't respond right away. It's Emily, she said, in case I didn't recognize her voice, but I did. I'd heard it enough in interviews, in rehearsed tributes, in the echo of family dinners I'd never been invited to. What do you want? I asked plainly. A pause. Then I think we should talk. In person. No. Marianne. You erased me from her funeral. You erased me from her life. I'm not going to brunch with you now. This isn't about brunch. There was something tight in her voice. Tension, yes, but not just defensiveness. There was fear. I straightened. What is this about? Emily exhaled. They're going to leak something. Dad's furious. You've made him look small, and he doesn't forgive that. I almost laughed. I haven't made him anything. He is small. He's calling in favors from people with platforms, people who owe him. He's going to twist everything, make it sound like Mom was confused, like you manipulated her when she was already declining. There it was. The next tactic Olivia had warned me about, emotional manipulation dressed as concern, wrapped in just enough truth to keep me on the phone. Why are you warning me? I asked. Silence. Because I don't want to see her legacy turn into a war, Emily said finally. Because despite everything, I think we both cared about her. Even if she gave more of herself to you. I swallowed hard. You're not doing this for her, I said. You're doing this because the exhibit is gone, and you're scared of what else might unravel. Her breath caught just for a moment. You think I didn't care about her, she said sharply. She was the only real thing in that house. I wanted her approval. Every year, every holiday, every time I showed up with another framed degree or press mention, I waited for her to look at me the way she looked at you. And she never did. The air between us thickened. I was the one taking care of her, I said, quieter now. You visited maybe 3 times after her diagnosis. You curated a public version of grief, Emily. You weren't there when she couldn't lift a spoon. I wasn't allowed, she snapped. Dad said you had everything under control, that you didn't want us involved, that she didn't want to see us. I blinked. That wasn't true. Not entirely. Linda hadn't banned them, she just hadn't asked for them. In her final months, she'd clung to what was simple. And Emily was never simple. Did you ever ask her? I said. No, she admitted. I asked Dad. I let that sit. That's the difference between us, I said. I stopped believing him when I was 8. There was another pause. Then her voice shifted, dropped, as if she'd let the mask slip for a second. Dad told me something else, she said. About the will. I held my breath. He said she tried to change it after July, that she regretted giving it all to you. That she was confused about the studio. About who'd continue her work. A slow, acidic wave rose in my chest. She wasn't confused, I said. She was tired of being handled, of being translated, of being claimed. She wanted peace, and you all kept trying to brand her. She wanted someone to carry the torch, Emily replied. You think that's you? I know it is, I said calmly now. Because I never carried it for show. There was silence. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, almost like a final card laid flat, she added, they're going to say she was unstable, that her condition affected her memory, her signature, her judgment. They're going to bring in doctors. I'm telling you because I thought you deserved to know. Why now? Because even if I hated how she looked at you, I know you loved her, Emily said. And somewhere deep down, I think she did love me too. Just not the way I needed. For a flicker of a second, she sounded almost like a sister. Almost. But grief doesn't fix old maps, and pain doesn't automatically turn into kindness just because it's shared. I appreciate the warning, I said, but if you're looking for me to slow down, I won't. She left me the truth. I'm not giving it back. She didn't argue. Goodbye, Marin. Goodbye, Emily. I hung up. Later that evening, I told Olivia about the call. She's pre-positioning, Olivia said, tapping a pen against her legal pad. Your father wants to build a defense on the claim that Linda lacked testamentary capacity when she signed that statement. Can they? Olivia looked at me. It depends on whether we can prove she was of sound mind. We'll need corroborating evidence, witnesses, people who saw her working planning writing, anything that proves her intention was consistent and conscious, I thought back. There's someone, I said slowly, her old studio assistant. She was with us the last month, helped clean file things, prep materials. She saw Mom working. What's her name, Sadie? I paused. Sadie Klein. Track her down. Today. That night, I sat with Noah by the window, rain still tapping softly against the glass. We watched the city below glow in fragments, headlights, traffic signals, puddles catching pieces of the moon. She called to warn me, I said quietly. Noah nodded, and she sounded scared. She should be. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I keep waiting for this to stop hurting, I whispered. It might not, he said gently. But that doesn't mean it won't heal. I closed my eyes. Somewhere out there, Martin was sharpening his version of the story. But I had my own, and I had proof. Sadie Klein answered my email with a phone call the next morning. Marin. Her voice was cautious but kind. I was wondering when you'd reach out. Sadie had worked with my mother during the final 6 weeks of her life, just 2 days a week, organizing canvases, stretching frames, archiving. She was in her mid-20s then, fresh out of art school with a sketchbook always tucked under her arm and paint on her fingernails. Linda called her my shadow. We hadn't spoken since the memorial. I didn't know if you wanted to stay involved, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I did, she replied, but after the funeral, it felt like they closed the circle, like there wasn't a place for me. They did the same to me, I said. Sadie exhaled. Then I'm glad you're calling now. There's something I need to give you. We met at a small cafe in Soho neutral ground. She looked a little older now, more grounded, less rushed, but still wore oversized cardigans and kept her sketchbook visible on the table like a shield. She brought a padded envelope with her. I didn't feel right keeping this, she said, sliding it across to me. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn, buckled slightly at the corners, the kind Linda used to buy at the farmer's market every fall. It's hers, I whispered. Sadie nodded. She gave it to me the day before she passed, said to hold on to it, said it wasn't for the lawyers or the gallery or… Martin, just for you. My hands shook as I opened the first page. To Marin. Not everything can be left on paper, but some things must be. Tears blurred the ink almost instantly. Sadie looked away, giving me space. I didn't read it, she said, but I knew it mattered. I flipped slowly through the entries. They weren't daily, more like fragments, memories, reflections. Some pages just held a sentence. Some were full of paragraphs. All of it in her handwriting, looped, elegant, increasingly shaky as the pages progressed. There were sections about her work, her pain, her fear of being forgotten. And they're just over halfway in a date that stopped me cold. July the 2nd, the day before she signed the will. Martin will hate what I've decided. He'll say I wasn't thinking clearly. He said that before, about my choices, my voice, my daughter. But this is the clearest I've felt in months. Marin has held me together. She understands the work because she is the work, truth, silence, and fire beneath both. I turned the page. Emily is made of performance. She mimics what she thinks love looks like, but love isn't speeches or curated tributes. It's Tuesday afternoons and ugly tears and the smell of linseed oil on your hands. Another, if they erase Marin, then they erase me. If they tell the world she wasn't here, then I never was either. I closed the book and held it to my chest. Sadie reached out gently. I didn't know what it said, she said, but I hoped it was something like that. It's everything, I whispered. Back in Olivia's office, I laid the journal on her desk. She skimmed the entries, silently jaw tight, brows pulled low in concentration. When she reached the July pages, she looked up at me. This changes everything. You think it holds up more than holds up. It confirms intention. The biggest legal hurdle in cases like yours is proving mental clarity and consistent purpose. This journal does both in her voice, in her hand, in real time. I swallowed. Will it be enough? Olivia leaned back. It won't end the war, but it's a sword they can't ignore. She tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking. They'll argue she was confused, but now we have her own words dated, grounded, independent of influence. It counters everything Martin's team is trying to build. I nodded slowly. Then let's use it. The first wave came 2 days later. A piece in an online arts outlet clearly leaked by Martin's PR consultant painted Linda as increasingly unstable during her final year. It quoted unnamed sources who described her as erratic, withdrawn, and easily manipulated by close companions. The article never mentioned me by name, but I was the shadow in every paragraph. I sent the link to Olivia. She responded with one word, expected. Noah printed it out, underlined every passive-aggressive insinuation in red, and left it on our fridge as a motivational dartboard. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had something stronger than a rebuttal. I had Linda's voice. Asha Lee called later that evening. We'd like to publish excerpts from the journal, she said. With your permission. I hesitated. Wouldn't that be too personal? Asha was quiet. Then it's personal that makes it powerful. If you want the world to understand who she really was, not the sanitized version, not the weaponized version. This is how. I looked at the journal still sitting on my nightstand. And I knew she was right. 1 week later, the Curator's Lens published a follow-up feature, Tuesday Afternoons and Linseed Oil, the private words of Linda Delaney. The response was seismic. Readers flooded the comments. Some called it the most honest glimpse into creative aging I've ever read. Others wrote, this is what legacy should mean. Truth, not polish. A few museum boards even began re-evaluating which pieces from Linda's estate had been acquired and whether proper representation had been followed. That night, Noah brought home champagne in a paper bag. He didn't toast to victory. He just raised his glass and said, to truth. We clinked glasses. And for the first time since the funeral, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was going to win. Not in court, in history. The courthouse smelled like cold air and carpet cleaner. Noah sat beside me in the hallway outside the hearing room, his hand loosely wrapped around mine. Olivia paced calm, methodical in her gray pantsuit, flipping through her legal pad, reviewing her bullet points out loud like she was rehearsing a quiet war. The motion we were about to defend against was Martin's first official strike, an emergency petition for injunction filed to halt any further public disclosure of Linda's journal, claiming it violated his rights as her legal executor and compromised the estate's ability to represent itself. In other words, he wanted to gag me. He's not trying to win, Olivia had told me the night before. He's trying to drain you, delay, distract, make the process so overwhelming you'll walk away. But I wouldn't, not when I had her voice. The courtroom was small, just 2 rows of benches and a single elevated bench at the front. I'd never been inside one before, but it looked exactly like the place where Linda had sat 2 decades earlier, battling Martin over child support and the rights to her own art business after the divorce. Back then, he had won. Back then, she'd walked out silent. Not this time. The judge entered a woman maybe mid-50s with sharp eyes and a wedding ring that looked older than her robe. She glanced over the docket, raised her chin, and said, let's keep this brief. Martin sat to my left, flanked by 2 of his attorneys. He wore a suit darker than his mood and never once looked my way. Beside him, Emily sat in a navy dress, jaw locked. Her eyes met mine only once and quickly turned away. They looked like a family at a funeral they weren't sure they should be attending. When Olivia stood, her voice was calm but unmistakably assertive. Your Honor, she began. We're not here today to dispute grief or family or even taste. We're here because my client is being punished for honoring the truth. Truth written by her mother's own hand. Truth that was never meant to be hidden. The journal is not hearsay. It's not speculative. It is direct dated and corroborated by witnesses. What Mr. Delaney calls defamation, we call documentation. Martin's lawyer stood clearly rehearsed. Your Honor, we're not disputing the existence of the journal. We're disputing its public release, especially when the estate has not reviewed its contents in full. The publication was premature, inappropriate, and prejudicial to the estate's ongoing affairs. The judge raised a brow. The estate's affairs, or Mr. Delaney's reputation, silence. She looked at Olivia. Is the journal in your possession? Yes, Your Honor. We've also submitted scanned copies to the clerk. The original is available upon request. Did Ms. Delaney receive the journal from the deceased directly? Yes. Any financial interest in its content? None. The judge turned to Martin's team. I'm not inclined to gag a grieving daughter over her mother's words, she said plainly. You want to dispute authorship? Do it with evidence, not intimidation. With that, the motion was denied. Outside, the air was brighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was. Olivia turned to me as we exited down the courthouse steps. That was the first battle, not the last. I'm ready, I said. I wasn't entirely sure I was, but the words felt true. Emily followed us out a few steps behind alone, now her heels clicking like echoes. She paused on the sidewalk and called after me. Marin. I turned. She looked uncertain, the same way I must have looked dozens of times in her presence. Like someone who wanted something but had no idea how to ask. You won, she said. No, I replied. The truth did. She took a slow breath. Dad's going to escalate. He's planning to challenge the journal's admissibility for probate. He says it's emotionally motivated fiction. It's not fiction, I said. You've read it. You know. Emily hesitated, then nodded barely. She loved you, she said quietly. In a way I couldn't compete with. You didn't have to compete, I said. You just had to be there. A beat passed. And then she walked away. That night I found myself sitting alone in my studio, Linda's old space lit only by a desk lamp and the faint pink reflection of the city through the stained glass above. I opened the journal again, not to quote it, not to weaponize it, just to hear her voice. I flipped to the back, one final entry. I was never good at endings, so I won't write one. Marin will decide where the last period goes. She knows how to carry the weight without breaking. She is the future of this room, not because I gave it to her, but because she built it with me. I closed the book. Tomorrow, Olivia said we'd file our response to the estate challenge, a formal statement of standing. It would name me not just as a biological daughter, but as Linda's chosen steward of art, memory, and truth. Martin could try to fight the papers, but he couldn't fight the past. The hearing was set for 9:00 a.m. sharp. Olivia told me not to expect fireworks. This is probate court, not a Netflix finale, she said with a wry smile, but we both knew what was at stake. Martin had filed a formal challenge to the journal's admissibility, arguing that Linda had diminished mental capacity and that no competent legal intent could be derived from its contents. His aim was clear: erase the document, erase me. We walked into the courtroom prepared. But we weren't alone. Olivia's plan hinged on a surprise witness. Someone Martin wouldn't have seen coming because for decades he hadn't believed Linda needed therapy. To him, admitting to emotional pain was weakness. But Linda had gone anyway. Her therapist, Dr. Evelyn Monroe, was in her 70s now, semi-retired gray curls pulled back in a soft twist. She wore a plum-colored suit and glasses that magnified her gentle but resolute eyes. Olivia had contacted her weeks earlier. Linda had signed a written release for Marin years before her death, a small act of foresight neither of us could have anticipated. With that permission on record, Evelyn could speak. And what she said would change everything. The courtroom was quiet when Evelyn took the stand. The judge, the same woman from the previous hearing, adjusted her glasses and gave a respectful nod. Olivia rose. Dr. Monroe, can you describe the nature of your relationship with the late Linda Delaney? I was her therapist, Evelyn said calmly. From 2013 to 2021, we met weekly for nearly 8 years until her illness made travel difficult. And in your professional opinion, was she of sound mind during the period in question, specifically July 2021? Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation. She was physically declining but mentally very clear, especially about what she wanted and who she trusted. Did she ever discuss her legacy? Her family? She did. Often. Evelyn glanced at me, then continued. She was afraid, not of death, but of being misrepresented, of being turned into a symbol she hadn't chosen. She told me on more than one occasion that she feared Martin and Emily would turn her work into a performance, that they would take credit, reshape history, and silence the person who had actually been there. The courtroom air grew denser. She said Marin had earned that legacy, not because she was her daughter, but because she stayed when no one else did, because she listened, because she understood. Martin's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Dr. Monroe, isn't it true that grief can distort memory, that proximity can create illusion? Evelyn blinked slowly. Yes, in some people. But not in Linda. She didn't confuse gratitude with legacy. She had clarity, even in pain. And yet she never filed a formal will through legal counsel, did she? She said she tried, Evelyn replied evenly. But Martin interfered. She told me he pressured her to keep the estate clean and centralized. She feared being gaslit again, legally this time. A ripple went through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow, but didn't intervene. She said she chose the journal, Evelyn concluded, because she didn't trust the legal system to preserve her voice. A pause, then she added, but she trusted Marin. When Evelyn stepped down, Olivia handed the judge our final exhibit, a letter Linda had written unsent, but preserved, found in the same manila envelope. In it, Linda wrote directly, "If Marin is standing before you now reading this, then I didn't make it to file the official will. I wish I had, but know this: my daughter did not steal anything. She was my right hand, my archivist, my caretaker, my mirror. If anyone deserves to carry what I leave behind, it is her." The judge read the letter silently for nearly a full minute. Then she looked up at me. "Ms. Delaney," she said, "do you have anything you wish to say before I rule?" I stood. My knees didn't shake this time. "I never asked for the spotlight," I said, "but I won't step out of it just to make others comfortable. My mother gave me her voice. I'm not giving it back." The judge nodded once. Then she ruled. The journal and Linda's intent would stand. The challenge was dismissed. And just like that, the legacy was mine. Outside the courthouse, the light was golden. Late autumn filtered through the trees like an old memory, worn, beautiful, a little softer than it used to be. I stood on the steps for a long moment, letting it wash over me. Noah came up beside me and took my hand. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I don't feel triumphant," I said. "I feel grounded." "That's what winning feels like when it's real," he said. A few steps behind us, Emily stood with her arms crossed. She didn't say anything, but she didn't walk away either. Our eyes met. She gave me the smallest nod. Not approval, not defeat, just acknowledgement. It was enough. 1 month later, I reopened the studio, not as a memorial, as a living archive. I renamed it The Delaney Room, in memory and motion. The first exhibit featured Linda's final works, curated exactly as she'd planned them, notes pulled from our shared notebook installations, arranged with the light she always insisted on. Asha Lee wrote the catalog introduction. Sadie helped with restoration. Dr. Evelyn Monroe cut the ribbon at the opening. And people came, not just critics, former students, old friends, young artists, a couple who'd once bought a stained glass sun catcher from my mother at a craft fair in 1992. They didn't come for spectacle, they came for her. And for the first time, they saw me standing beside her. Not behind, beside. Exactly where I'd always been. 6 months after the court ruling, I returned to the lake house. It had been closed for nearly a year. The driveway was littered with pine needles and silence. The key still worked, the one Linda had left under the ceramic frog in the garden, the same spot since I was 12. Inside, everything was frozen in time. The Afghan still draped over the reading chair. A half-burned candle, a tube of her favorite hand cream. The faint smell of turpentine and lavender clung to the walls like memory. Noah stayed back in the city that weekend. Go, he said. Take the quiet. So I did. I walked through each room, slowly pausing where I used to sit while she painted. I opened the windows. Let the wind roll through. Let the dust swirl and settle. Let the silence become mine again. I wasn't there for closure. I was there to live in a space that had once belonged to both of us, not in fragments, but in wholeness. And in that stillness, I began to feel it. Peace. Not triumph, not vindication. Just peace. One afternoon, I opened the drawer by her bed and found a stack of postcards. They were all addressed to me, unsent. Each one dated, each written in her looping, uneven handwriting. Some were full of lines. Some had just a few words. You remind me of the sky today, steady and changing all at once. I watched you hold my hands during the scan. You didn't flinch once. You're stronger than I ever was. I'm sorry I didn't protect you more from your father. I thought ignoring him would be enough. It wasn't. I love you, not just for who you are now, but for the girl who stayed even when it would have been easier to walk away. I read each one like a bomb. She hadn't mailed them, maybe she didn't know how, or maybe she thought her time would stretch longer. But they were here, meant for me. Gifts in ink. I placed them in a small tin box and carried it back to the city. Back at the studio, the energy had shifted. Visitors no longer asked, "Were you really her daughter?" Now they asked, "What did it feel like to learn from her?" And I told them it felt like walking into a room already full of light and still being welcome to bring a candle. The next exhibit was mine, not a tribute, not a legacy piece, just my own work. Paintings she'd never seen, mixed media, memory landscapes, sketches from those months I'd spent alone in the apartment after her death. I called it The Weight I Carried Home. It opened on a Thursday evening in late spring. Asha gave the toast. Olivia showed up with her sleeves rolled and no makeup beaming. Sadie stood beside the display wall, explaining to strangers how layering glass and ink had become a healing process. Emily came too. She didn't make a speech. She didn't ask to be in photos. She just walked through the gallery quietly, pausing at one piece, a self-portrait I'd painted titled The Room Where She Once Lost. She didn't say a word, but she wiped her eyes. That was enough. I'm telling you all of this not because it ends cleanly. It doesn't. Grief never wraps itself into a perfect bow. It folds, it lingers, it echoes. But it also softens, like lake water over sharp stones, like sunlight through old windows. I no longer carry my mother's name like a wound. Now I carry it like a compass. And wherever it points, I follow. Because the legacy wasn't the art. It was the freedom to create something honest, something loud, something messy, and to leave it behind without apology. We didn't send formal invitations. There were no embossed cards, no cursive font, no RSVP deadlines. Just a handwritten note at the bottom of every email, under the pines, no pressure, no performance. Come as you are, or send us a song. Noah and I chose the forest, a small clearing just outside Beacon where the trees arched over like a cathedral, and the late spring sun flickered through new leaves like old stained glass. We kept it small. 37 people. No cousins, no aunts, no uncles. No one who needed to put aside tension for the day. No one who thought of forgiveness as a performance. Just people who had stayed. People who had shown up. Sadie brought wildflowers from her own garden and wove them into my braid. Olivia wore hiking boots under her silk dress and cried openly when she saw me. Asha brought her partner and a Polaroid camera, promising not to post a thing until after. Jason, my childhood friend, the one who had seen every version of me from braces to breakdowns, walked me down the aisle. He didn't ask if I wanted him to. He just showed up in a vintage suit jacket with a daisy in his lapel and said, "You've done this life alone long enough. Let's walk this part together." I nearly lost it right there. We stood in front of a handmade arch built by Noah and his brother from reclaimed barnwood, wrapped in soft cloth and dried eucalyptus. There were no vows from a book, no "we are gathered here today," just Noah smiling nervously, holding both my hands and saying, "You met me in the middle of becoming. You saw who I was and who I was scared to be, and you stayed. So now I stay too. For the art, for the quiet mornings, for the long roads we haven't driven yet. I didn't recite anything. I just looked at him, tears catching at the corners of my lips, and whispered, "This is the first place I've ever felt safe to say everything." He understood. Of course he did. We kissed beneath pine trees that had been standing long before either of us were born. The wind moved through them like applause. Afterward, we ate on picnic blankets. There were guitars and a cello. Someone passed around rosemary bread. The wine was local and warm from the sun. Olivia made a toast that ended with "to stories rewritten." Asha read from one of Linda's essays about imperfection and inheritance, and no one asked where my father was. No one mentioned Emily, or the gallery, or the court. There were no empty chairs for people who chose not to come. We didn't toast to their absence. We simply lived in their irrelevance. Later, as the sun dipped low and the fireflies came out, Jason sat beside me and handed me a folded note. "I think she would have written this if she could," he said. Inside, in my mother's handwriting, copied from an old letter I'd forgotten she wrote me during my first art show in high school, were 10 words. "Be exactly as you are. No smaller, no quieter." I held the note to my chest, and I danced with no shoes on. That night, in a borrowed cabin lit only by string lights and the last shimmer of moonlight, I curled against Noah and whispered, "That was the wedding I needed." He kissed the top of my head and said, "It was the marriage we're building that matters." And he was right. The wedding was beautiful. But the life after the quiet, the real, the shared brushstrokes that was the masterpiece. The last piece I hung in the studio wasn't mine. It was Linda's. One of her earliest works, small, almost overlooked, buried behind newer, louder canvases. I found it while cataloging boxes for the new archive wing. Just a quiet oil painting, 2 women on a hillside, one standing, one sitting. No faces. Just posture. One upright, watching the sky. The other curled into the grass, reaching up, not in fear, but in trust. She never titled it, so I did, before she knew I'd catch her. It became the final piece in the exhibit. Not because it was the best, but because it said everything. One afternoon, an older woman came to the studio. She wore a blue scarf, carried a cloth notebook, and spoke softly as if each word had weight. She walked the entire gallery twice alone, pausing longest in front of the journal excerpts. Then she approached the desk. "Are you her daughter?" she asked. I nodded. "She spoke of you," the woman said. "I was in a critique circle with her. Back in the 90s, she used to say, 'My daughter doesn't make noise, but she sees everything.'" I blinked. "She wasn't wrong," I said. She smiled, took my hand gently, and whispered, "She'd be proud, not of the fight, but of the stillness you've built afterward." Then she left. That night, I stayed in the studio long after closing. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor beneath the last frame. Outside, the city moved as always, sirens, laughter, footsteps. But inside, it was still. I lit one candle, opened one window. And in the quiet, I whispered a thank you to the woman who taught me that art didn't need applause to matter and that healing wasn't always loud. Not everything ends with a twist. Some things end quietly, cleanly, like a canvas that doesn't need another stroke. Months passed. No more letters from lawyers. No more interviews, just days, some hard, some golden. Noah and I planted herbs on the fire escape. Jason got engaged to someone he met restoring a mural. Sadie was offered her first solo show. And I began sketching again, not for deadlines, not for exhibits, just for me, just because I still could. Linda's studio remained open, but it no longer felt like a museum. It felt like home, not the kind you inherit. The kind you build slowly, honestly, with the right people beside you. Every now and then, I walked to the corner where her first piece ever sold used to hang. The galleries changed hands, now filled with chrome sculptures and minimalist prints. But I still pause. Because grief doesn't vanish. It transforms. And every time I remember her, not the curated version, but the one with paint on her jeans and silence in her smile, I feel her beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a beginning, because this story was never about what I lost. It was always about what I chose to keep. And I chose her, always.